Hello, everybody. Welcome back to SHC TV. I am Secondhand Coke, and it is good to be back with you today for a little handwriting analysis. So, I've taken a page out of Meghan Markle's business manual and I've totally rebranded my handwriting series midstream here. I'm calling it now Markle's Marks, an ex royal handwriting analysis by Secondhand Coke. And I've redone the graphics a bit. We are still on part 3 of 4, and I'm thinking it's going to be 4 parts. I might go into a fifth. We'll just see how far I get to in the next episode, which is going to be pretty involved. I also have redone our little musical opener for this particular spot. So we will go and listen to that now, and I will see you on the other side of it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was a bit catchy. It was really hard trying to find samples of Harry's handwriting, you wouldn't believe. Um, not really. But and then thank you to whatever children contributed those handwriting cycles to or samples to Google so that I could use them to do a sight gag on Prince Harry. Anyway, part 3 of 4 of the handwriting analysis. Today we're going to look at the size of Megan's handwriting, the width between and the spacing between words, how much space it takes up in a line, how much it takes up on a page, and also what kind of pen pressure she uses. And we'll be discussing the meaning of all of that, and that should be a good enough chunk to get us through analyzing Megan's handwriting for today. So let's go ahead and take a look at the size of her writing. So on the left there, I've provided kind of a visual reference to kind of get us all on the same page about what we're define our terms about what is large, what is medium, what is small. I classify Megan's handwriting as small, if not very small. You can see she really she really pulls in that writing and in the physicality of it. I mean, you can just feel like the tension in the hand to really draw in those little tiny letters, and not even to put the expected spaces that you find within letters themselves. Like the letter A has a circle, the O is a circle, for God's sake, and hers look like lines almost, or at least filled in dots. So when you're talking about writing size, um, it's not hard to really deduce where this comes from, because if you think about the physical action that somebody takes to create letters, you're making very large letters. You're moving your hand a lot, you're being very expressive, and so large writing tends to indicate like a very effusive personality, like somebody who's bubbly, is bubbling over, and has a very large personality, very extroverted, um very very comfortable taking up space where they are. So this is not somebody who is apologizing for their existence, the big writers, and is not feeling entitled to the space they take up in the world. This is a person who feels very free to write, to write that big, and you also find them in their lives to be very free to live that big, if you tend to write larger, you can, or know somebody who does, just think about, does that resonate as true within your realm of experience or not? And if it does, then that, leads credence to these theories in graphology. If it doesn't, then, it's just pseudoscience as yet. So, we're it's just it's a theory, but I've tended to see that it is pretty accurate. Um, Bigger handwriting is associated with extroversion, with friendliness, with openness, but also on the negative side, every type has both their benefits and their detriments. And on the negative side of that, it could be a person with boundary issues, somebody who is nosy or lacks self-control, somebody who might be reckless. So that all kind of goes along with large handwriting. So small handwriting, you would accurately deduce, kind of goes with the opposite. So, for example, small handwriting is correlated with an introverted personality. And this kind of took me by surprise with Megan's handwriting, not because I haven't seen it, but when I started to actually think about what everything meant, I was like, I would have always assumed that she was an extrovert. Um, but, her handwriting is telling a different story. And if you think about it, once I started to think about I started to remember these stories about her. For example, in Lady C's book and Tom Bower's book, they talk about how she gets to the garden party that Prince Charles threw at the time, and she's there for 15 minutes before she's got Harry leaving early because she's over it. Lady C reported, and I think Tom Bower may have as well, that even at her own wedding reception, she got there and then she was over the crowd and didn't want to be there anymore, didn't want to walk around and receive people and, do all that's required socially within a wedding reception, and was trying to get Harry to leave. And then, her talking about the walkabout, saying, I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this. All of those anecdotes, those little stories about her, do kind of indicate or seem to indicate that she might be an introvert. There's also the fact that she does not have a wide circle of friends. Now, I always assume that to be because she's an asshole, but it may be a matter of choice as much as anything. She's pared her family size down to very few people. She doesn't seem to have a thriving kind of friend group social life. And if you listen to anything like on her TV show, like having a game night with a couple of girlfriends or just having a couple of friends over, that seems to be her jam. Dear God. So yeah, small handwriting, introversion rather. I can see that in her. If you disagree or maybe have another take on it or more stories about her that would confirm that, by all means share in the comments. But as for whether she's an introvert or an extrovert, her handwriting is saying that she's more likely to be introverted. So somebody who has small handwriting, it also, if you think about the physical movement or the physicality, the physiognomy of what would be needed to write small, it indicates a person with a lot of self-control. And that's something else that kind of surprised me, because I considered Megan not to have much self-control. She's not self-aware, for God's sake. But when I think about it in terms of, she is very controlled. Everything she does is rehearsed. She doesn't seem to do anything out of impulse. That's part of what is so abrasive about her, is that she doesn't seem to have this impulsivity that she acts upon. So yeah, while I wouldn't have assumed it based on, what what we see of her in public, I mean, it's hard to believe someone who behaves so poorly would do so with self-control, but yeah, her handwriting says she's got a lot of control, and part of that is over herself, her self movements, and making those letters and saying so tight. I mean, that's an uptight. She can't even make circles in her O's and her A's. Like that is a clenched personality, isn't it? I mean, it, it I see it. If you don't, maybe we're looking at something different. But or if you're skeptical, by all means share your opinion in the comments. But to me, thinking about it now and looking at it, yeah, I think she is a person who has an immense amount of self-control. And that's part of her problem, is she probably has too much self-control. So another part of writing smallly is that it requires a lot of focus. And when you think about your handwriting and what your handwriting is yourself, and it's your thoughts, and a small handwriting requires a lot of focus, a lot of self-focus. So, and she is focused on herself to a fault. I think we would agree, to the extent that she can't even have a TV show use a different font other than her own handwriting. Is weird. I mean, she's definitely controlled, and she is definitely self-focused, and that's definitely being borne out within her handwriting. Another thing is that the small writing, it indicates a withholding personality, a personality that keeps things from people, that keeps things close to the chest. It's not a personality that spills out, that overshares, twerking video notwithstanding. But this type of writing indicates that she is the opposite of a person who overshares. And, at first you think about all of the things about her that we know that we don't want to know. And we think, yes, she overshares, but she really doesn't. Or else we would know more about, the births or lack of birth of those children. We would know more about her parenting life or lack thereof. She really does have control over what she's putting out into public, and that's borne out in her handwriting. I remember in the Oprah interview, she told this story, like when the topic of privacy came up. She told this story about, like, well, if I were working in a desk job at a cubicle, and somebody came to my cubicle and saw pictures of my children on my desk, or asked to see a picture of my children, or to see more pictures than what I displayed, I I'm thinking, this is what I've chosen to share with you. And this is what I'm sharing with you. This is what I feel comfortable with. And that, in other words, her being asked to share more than she actually was sharing was inappropriate or rude, or or that she was saying it was no different than what anybody else does. Um, sh- that's just another contributory little anecdote there that she was talking about. So, yeah, small handwriting and all the things that go with it. If her handwriting is to be trusted, and the psychological implications of those things, then we get those personality traits for her, and I think we see some evidence of it. So yeah, let's move on to the next. Okay, so we know that in handwriting, it's there is both, the written word, the ink on the page, but equally important is the blank space surrounding the ink on the page, because that's what, helps us delineate words, delineate letters from each other, or, designate what is a separate word versus what is a separate letter, a separate sentence. So the separations and the space that we put in our writing is as meaningful as what we scribble out in positive space. So there are, areas of expected space in what people write. There's the margins, and so, you can there's a whole school of thought about how people's margins weigh into to their, what their margins are expressing about their personalities. But also, there's the space between letters, the space between words, between lines, and there's the space within letters, because we know letters are lines and circles for the most part. And so there's space there. So just as we look at what's written out and derive meaning from that, you can derive meaning from what is the blank space there, or lack thereof, depending on the writer. So interestingly enough, space in handwriting corresponds with social intelligence, with social behaviors, and with the need for privacy. So, the rule of thumb in regarding what is normal spacing is that the space between letters should not be any bigger than the space within letters, that the space between words not be bigger than the space within the word. Um, so that's kind of the rule of thumb. Um, Now, the writer's ego is, if you think about it as the writer's ego is being expressed with each word written, then you look at what's around the word or around the letter, and you think, is this writer surrounding his or herself with other words, aka people, other egos, or is it staying separate and withheld and keeping a distance between words? And we can see in Megan's handwriting here, there is a huge amount of space between words, not a lot of space within words. And so we want to look at what that means. So Megan says she's a hugger, but her handwriting says differently. So the space between the words indicates space that the writer likes to keep between themselves and others. So she, as much as she hugs, she keeps a huge amount of emotional distance between herself and other people, and is very controlled over what she shares between herself and other people. A lot of space in between words, like I feel like you see with Megan's writing, when there's a lot of it, it indicates paranoia. It indicates a suspicion of others, a desire to be isolated from others. And, when I think about Megan, all of that checks out. She's isolated herself and her little family up there in the shit show in Montecito. And again, we spoke about with the size of her handwriting, how she doesn't seem to she's prone to introversion. But to me, with this much space, it looks almost pathological, to the point where she's paranoid. And indeed, you do see in her stories, in the way that she pictorially like pictures herself and Harry with, by themselves with their backs to the world, like alone with, it's like us against the world. She seems to have this mentality. When she's talking about, even in the last podcast interview she did, when the podcaster asked her, and I've only seen clips of this but when the podcaster asked her, what do you wish had was done differently, she says, I wish people had told the truth about me. And that's a paranoia. She has said in the past, or floated out, that the reason her endeavors aren't successful is because the royal family is sabotaging her success. All throughout Spare, which we know was written in part by Meghan Markle, is this paranoia, part of which is legitimately probably Harry's, but is this paranoia like she was fed to the wolves by the royal family. They were jealous of how popular she was, and so they were attacking her. And so, yeah, that paranoia is borne out in the spacing between her writing. So we've got wide space between the words, but then we also have within the words not a lot of space. And it's called word compression. And this indicates a person who is extremely tense, very close minded, doesn't have any room. And so if you think about that symbolically through the writing, in order to, like I said about her being clenched, I mean, there's no space. You can't see any, I can barely see just a tiny dot of space in those A's. The E's are basically vertical lines. I mean, the only thing differentiating them from I's is the lack of a dot. But you that indicates it requires a muscular tension, and that only reinforces the idea that somebody writing like this is tense and is intense. And it doesn't, if you think of your words as your ideas, there's no room in those words for other ideas. There's no space, not even where there's supposed to be space. So she's got this weird dichotomy of having this widely spaced out words, but compressed words, which is like a double whammy of crazy in the graphology world. So it means she's got, having both compressed words and wide spacing reveals a person who is excessively close-minded and paranoid, and needs the influence of other people to break out of that negative thought pattern, but is so separated from people, it just reinforces the paranoia, the closed-mindedness, the wind tunnel that she's put herself in. So all she does is she surrounds herself with nobody, but the people that she does let in are just echoing what she wants to hear. So and that's what her handwriting says, and in my opinion, that is everything that we have seen borne out by the behavior of Meghan Markle. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. If you know of any other stories, or if you've heard something else about handwriting that you think would be interesting for us to know, by all means share it in the comments. But let's move on to the last aspect of handwriting that we're going to discuss for today, which is pen pressure. Okay, so pen pressure typically is most or best measured when you have the sheet of writing in front of you and you can feel on the back. That's typically the litmus test for having heavy pressure versus light pressure. So we can't exactly do that, but we can see to a bit just by how thick the stroke marks are, and how much the ink kind of bleeds, which is partly because of whatever kind of pen she's using, which is probably some pretentious fountain pen. But I've got on the left side a barometer of pressure, of writing pressure, for us to kind of compare and contrast and draw conclusions from. I would say that Megan's pen pressure is somewhere between medium and heavy. Now, heavy pen pressure, this indicates a forceful personality. If you think about the aggression that you're placing, the pressure that you're putting on your pen to make it, press through the page itself, it's not hard to, deduce from that it would take a forceful personality to do that in their writing all the time. People with heavy pressure, they don't hesitate to kind of dig into not only other people's business, they dig into other people to get them to do what they want. They put pressure on others to get what they want out of them. They also put pressure on themselves and put pressure and almost like just a laser focus on their own goals, which everything we hear about Meghan Markle seems, I mean, she set a target and she hit it. I mean, in acting, she was limited. She ended up, I think, probably in the best situation that she could possibly have ended up in for someone with her amount of talent. Which, having a recurring role on Suits, that's I would call a successful acting career. She's not a movie star like she wanted everybody to believe, but it takes a lot of perseverance, takes a lot of laser focus on what you want to be able to get that far. And she, we can speculate on how she used men to get to every step of her life, but she does seem to be very single-minded, very focused on what's going on at the moment, almost to the detriment of everything else. But we also know she doesn't maintain her pressure. Her focus, that laser focus, she does not maintain it very well. Or maybe she is. We look at her failed endeavors and her jumping from children's books to, being a royal duchess to, writing a blog to, being a cast member on Suits, to all of those things. And we might see those as being a lack of focus. But I think if we think about what she's actually focused on, which I think it's money. I think that's what she's going for in every endeavor that she has, pushed herself into from high school onto her current age has been an endeavor to get money. And so she has not lost that particular focus, if that is indeed her focus. Even right. So, a person with heavy pen pressure also has no problem putting that pressure on other people. So a person with, she's intense to be around. I mean, somebody who with such thin, spindly lines is getting that amount of darkness in her writing is putting putting pressure down. I mean, that's all there is really to be said. Somebody with a heavy pen pressure, like she seems to have, also is said to have a strong impulse to control both herself and other people. But also it's associated, and this is just an interesting little tidbit, but heavy pen pressure is associated with kind of Epicurean interests, including very spicy food. So, and if you've seen that stupid ass show, you know that she just thinks she's the shit for being able to tolerate spicy food. So there's that. Okay, so that's it for today. Again, all other analysis we're just going to take straight from her handwriting samples. And our next episode may be the last, unless it takes me longer to get through than I think it will. And I think it's going to be 4 or 5, because next time we're going to start looking at individual quirks, which you see in the formation of certain letters, of letters loops, of how I's are dotted and T's are slashed, and how there are these novelty letters, like how you make your G's. There's also something called the felon's claw that we're going to look at next week, or not next week, but next video, which will probably be in a day or two. And so that'll be the rest of our handwriting exploration, is looking at the quirks, the individual letters, the little, nooks and crannies that kind of give us insight, or are said to give us insight into a personality, and give us kind of the inside story. So that's what we have coming up. Thank you for joining me today. And I hope that this has been interesting for you. If it has, please please share, please subscribe, ring the notification bell, leave me comments, all the YouTube stuff. And if you're not really into the handwriting analysis thing, we'll be back with Lady C's next chapter before the end of the week, and I'll probably, finish the last two stupid episodes of her stupid show at some point too, but that probably won't be before next week. All right, thanks again for joining me today. I hope you're having a wonderful week and that you continue to do so. See you soon. Bye-bye.